"Mom, why is that man eating alone?" The question was simple, the kind of question only a child would ask. And before the night was over, it would change for lives forever. The chandelier light shimmered across crystal glasses and polished silverware as Victoria Hayes stepped into Bellamy's Steakhouse with her 10-year-old son beside her. The restaurant sat on the 32nd floor overlooking downtown Chicago, where thousands of city lights stretched across the horizon like stars scattered across black velvet. It was the kind of place where reservations were booked weeks in advance and where people lowered their voices when they spoke. Victoria was used to places like this. As CEO of Hayes Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country, she spent most evenings surrounded by investors, executives, and carefully rehearsed conversations. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight belonged to Noah. "You can order anything you want," she said with a smile as the hostess led them toward their table. Noah nodded politely, but his attention seemed elsewhere. He barely noticed the panoramic view, barely glanced at the menu. Victoria assumed he was tired. School had been demanding lately, and she knew she hadn't been around as much as she should have been. The guilt sat quietly in her chest, familiar and unwelcome. Their server arrived. Orders were placed. Water glasses were filled. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Then Noah stopped listening entirely. His eyes drifted toward the far corner of the restaurant. Victoria followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing remarkable. Just a man and a little girl seated at a small table near the window. The man looked to be in his late 30s. His denim jacket showed signs of wear. His boots were clean but old. The little girl sitting across from him wore a faded blue sweater and smiled as if she had not a single worry in the world. "Mom," Noah said quietly. Victoria looked back at him. "What is it?" Noah pointed. "That man." Victoria glanced again. "What about him?" Noah studied the stranger for a long moment. "He looks happy." The answer caught her off guard. Around them sat wealthy attorneys, surgeons, executives, and entrepreneurs. Yet somehow her son was focused on a man wearing a worn jacket in the corner of the room. Victoria watched more carefully. The little girl laughed at something the man said. He slid his dessert plate toward her without hesitation. She took one bite and giggled. He pretended to be offended that she had taken the biggest piece. She giggled even harder. It was such a small moment, such an ordinary moment, yet it carried a warmth that felt strangely rare. Noah continued watching. He gave her the last bite. Victoria smiled faintly. "Lots of dads do that." "Not like that," Noah replied. The restaurant hummed softly around them. Piano music floated through hidden speakers. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the windows, illuminated by the city lights. Then Noah said something Victoria never expected to hear. Something that made her set down her fork and stare at him in disbelief. "Mom," he whispered, his eyes still fixed on the stranger. "Can he sit with us?" Victoria blinked once, convinced she had misheard him. "What did you say?" Noah finally looked away from the corner table and met her eyes. "Can he sit with us?" His voice was not joking. It was not playful. It carried the simple sincerity only children possess before the world teaches them to measure people by titles, clothes, or bank accounts. Victoria glanced back toward the man and the little girl. The child was now carefully dividing a slice of cheesecake into two uneven pieces. Without hesitation, she pushed the larger piece toward her father. The man laughed softly and pushed it back toward her. She pushed it back again. A tiny battle of generosity unfolded between them. "Why do you want him to sit with us?" Victoria asked. Noah shrugged. "Because he seems nice." The answer should have been ordinary. Instead, it lingered in the air between them. Around them, conversations about quarterly earnings, investment portfolios, and luxury vacations drifted from neighboring tables. Yet Noah seemed completely uninterested in any of it. His attention remained fixed on the small family in the corner. Victoria found herself watching too. The man leaned forward and listened as the little girl spoke. Really listened. Not while checking a phone. Not while scanning emails. Not while thinking about the next meeting. His entire attention belonged to her. The little girl smiled constantly. Every expression seemed effortless. Every laugh sounded genuine. There was no expensive tablet in front of her. No designer clothes. No distractions. Just a child enjoying dinner with her father. Victoria felt an uncomfortable tug somewhere deep inside her chest. Noah had spent most of his childhood surrounded by comfort. The best schools. The safest neighborhoods. every opportunity money could provide. Yet she could not remember the last time she had seen him laugh that freely. The realization settled heavily over her. "Mom?" Noah asked. "Yes." "Do you think they are happy?" Victoria hesitated. The question felt larger than it should have. She looked toward the window where city lights reflected against the glass. Then she looked back at the father and daughter. The man's jacket was worn. His boots had clearly seen years of use. The little girl's sweater had been washed so many times that its color had faded. Yet there was warmth at their table that seemed untouched by worry. "I think they might be," Victoria admitted. Noah nodded, as if that confirmed something important. Across the room, the little girl suddenly reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Excitedly, she handed it to her father. He unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing. Even from a distance, Victoria could see colorful crayons covering the page. The man's face immediately softened. He studied the drawing as though it belonged in a museum. "What do you think she drew?" Noah asked. Victoria smiled faintly. "I have no idea." The man pointed at different parts of the picture, asking questions. The little girl answered enthusiastically. Whatever she had created, he treated it as something valuable, something worthy of his complete attention. Noah watched every second of it. Then he said something that made Victoria's heart ache more than she expected. "Dad used to look at my drawings like that." Silence settled over their table. Outside, snow continued drifting past the windows. Inside, the piano music floated softly through the restaurant. Victoria swallowed hard. Her husband had been gone for 3 years. Noah rarely spoke about him anymore. Yet somehow, a stranger in a worn denim jacket had reminded him of something he missed. And for the first time that evening, Victoria realized she was no longer simply observing that father and daughter. She was trying to understand why they seemed to possess something money could never buy. Victoria looked at her son for a long moment. The restaurant around them seemed to fade into the background. The soft piano music, the quiet conversations, the glow of the city beyond the windows. All of it felt distant compared to the sincerity in Noah's eyes. "You want a complete stranger to sit with us?" she asked gently. Noah nodded. "Just for a little while." Victoria almost laughed. Not because the idea was funny, but because it was so completely unexpected. In her world, people rarely approach strangers. Every introduction carried a purpose, a business opportunity, a social connection, a carefully calculated advantage. Yet Noah wanted none of those things. He simply saw someone he admired. "Mom?" Noah asked again. "Please." Victoria followed his gaze toward the corner table. The man was folding the drawing carefully and slipping it into his wallet as though it were something precious. The little girl watched him with a smile that could have brightened the entire room. Victoria felt that strange tug in her chest again. "I do not think people usually do that," she said. Noah tilted his head. "Why not?" It was such a simple question, one with no easy answer. Before Victoria could respond, the little girl at the other table suddenly looked in their direction. For a brief moment, her eyes met Noah's. She smiled and gave a small wave. Noah immediately waved back. The girl laughed. Her father noticed and turned. His expression carried mild surprise, followed by a warm, polite smile. Then he returned his attention to his daughter. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Noah stood up. "Noah." Victoria's voice sharpened slightly. He froze. "What are you doing?" "Saying hi." "Sit down." Noah hesitated. "But Mom." "Sit down." Slowly, he returned to his chair. Victoria immediately regretted the firmness in her tone. Noah rarely asked for much. He was thoughtful, kind, easy to raise despite everything he had endured. She sighed quietly. "I am sorry." Noah stared at the tablecloth. "It is okay." But it was not okay. She could hear the disappointment in his voice. Across the room, a burst of laughter erupted from another table. A group of sharply dressed businessmen occupied a large booth near the center of the restaurant. Their expensive watches caught the light each time they raised a hand. One of them glanced toward the corner table where the father and daughter sat. Another whispered something. Several of them chuckled. Victoria barely noticed. Noah did. "Why are they looking at him?" he asked. Victoria followed his gaze. The men quickly returned to their own conversation. "Probably nothing," she said. Yet something about their expressions unsettled her. The father appeared unaware. He remained focused on his daughter, listening as she animatedly described something using exaggerated hand gestures. Whatever story she was telling seemed very important. He listened to every word. Then the little girl suddenly reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The movement was brief, natural, effortless. The father smiled. Not the smile people wear in photographs. Not the smile executives practice during presentations. This was something quieter, something real. Noah watched the exchange and whispered, almost to himself, "He never stops paying attention to her." Victoria felt those words settle heavily inside her. Because deep down, she knew exactly why her son could not look away. The evening should have continued quietly. Orders should have arrived. Conversations should have remained separate. Yet something had begun to shift inside the restaurant, subtle as snowfall beyond the glass. Victoria tried returning her attention to her meal, but Noah's words lingered in her mind. He never stops paying attention to her. Across the room, the father and daughter remained wrapped in their own world. The little girl had somehow turned a folded napkin into a tiny paper bird. She proudly placed it in the center of the table. Her father examined it with exaggerated seriousness. "I think this might be the finest bird in Chicago," he said. The girl laughed. "Better than the ones at the zoo?" "Much better. Better than an eagle?" He pretended to think carefully. "That might be close." Her laughter rang softly across the room. Several nearby diners smiled despite themselves. Victoria noticed something remarkable. The father never reached for a phone, never checked a watch, never appeared distracted. Every second belonged to his daughter. In a city filled with people rushing somewhere else, he seemed completely present. Then movement from the large business table caught Victoria's attention. One of the businessmen glanced toward the corner again. Another leaned back in his chair and smirked. A third looked directly at the father and daughter before whispering something that triggered quiet laughter around the table. The sound was not loud enough to disturb the room, but it carried a certain edge, the kind that came from people accustomed to judging others quickly. Noah noticed it immediately. Children often did. "Mom," he whispered. "They keep looking at them." Victoria followed his gaze. The father appeared unaware. Or perhaps he had noticed and chosen not to react. The distinction mattered. One of the businessmen shook his head while looking toward the worn denim jacket. Another glanced at the little girl's sweater. More laughter followed. Victoria felt a flicker of irritation. Not because she knew the strangers. She did not. But because there was something unnecessarily cruel about turning another family's dinner into entertainment. The father continued speaking with his daughter. Calm, relaxed, unbothered. The little girl was describing a school project now, using both hands to explain something that seemed extremely important. He listened carefully and nodded at all the right moments. His attention never wavered. Why does he not say anything? Noah asked. About what? Those men. Victoria studied the scene. The answer arrived quietly. Maybe he does not need to. Noah considered that. Outside, the snow fell more heavily now, dusting rooftops and city streets 30 stories below. Inside, warm golden light reflected across polished wood and crystal glassware. The contrast felt almost symbolic. Noise on one side, peace on the other. Then something unexpected happened. One of the businessmen stood and adjusted his expensive suit jacket. As he passed the corner table, he slowed just enough to glance toward the father and daughter. The little girl's smile faded slightly. The father looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment. The businessman offered a thin smile and continued walking. Nothing was said. Nothing obvious occurred. Yet the atmosphere changed instantly. The little girl lowered her eyes toward her plate. The father noticed. He gently placed his hand over hers. "Hey," he said softly. Whatever concern had appeared on her face began to ease. She nodded. Then he smiled. And somehow, that single quiet gesture carried more strength than anything else in the room. The father kept his hand over his daughter's for only a moment, yet the effect was immediate. The worry faded from her face. The smile returned. Whatever had threatened her peace simply lost its power the instant she remembered she was not facing it alone. Victoria watched carefully. She had spent years leading thousands of employees, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts, and solving problems that filled entire boardrooms. Yet she could not remember the last time she had seen someone restore another person's confidence with something as simple as a smile. Noah noticed it too. "He always knows when she is sad," he whispered. Victoria nodded without taking her eyes off the corner table. "It seems that way." The little girl picked up her fork again and resumed talking about her school project. Within seconds she was laughing. Whatever discomfort had appeared moments earlier was completely gone. Meanwhile, The group of businessmen continued their conversation. Expensive watches flashed beneath the restaurant lights. Their voices occasionally rose above the soft music before settling back into the background. They occupied one of the largest tables in the restaurant, yet somehow their presence felt smaller than the tiny corner table near the window. The server arrived carrying the main courses. The father immediately slid the larger plate toward his daughter. "You need the fuel more than I do," he said. "Dad, what? You always say that." "Because it is always true." She rolled her eyes dramatically, causing him to laugh. Victoria felt something shift inside her again. Across from her, Noah had barely touched his own meal. Instead, he seemed fascinated by every interaction taking place at the other table. "Mom." "Yes." "Do you think they come here a lot?" Victoria glanced toward the father. "Probably not." "Then why tonight?" It was a reasonable question. Bellamy's was not inexpensive. Most families did not choose it casually. Before Victoria could answer, she noticed the father reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded envelope. The little girl's eyes widened immediately. "Is that it?" she asked excitedly. "It is." "Can I see?" He handed her the envelope. She opened it carefully as though handling treasure. Inside was a report card. Victoria could not read the details from across the room, but she did not need to. The little girl's reaction said everything. "Straight A's," Noah whispered after noticing the paper. The father nodded proudly. "Every single one." The girl beamed. "You promised." "I did. And you remembered." The father looked genuinely surprised. "Of course I remembered." The girl pressed the report card against her chest. "You said if I worked hard, we would celebrate somewhere special." For a brief moment, Victoria forgot about the businessmen, the restaurant, and even her own dinner. Suddenly, the entire evening made sense. This was not an ordinary meal. This was a promise being honored. A father keeping his word. The girl looked out at the snowy Chicago skyline and smiled so brightly that even nearby diners seemed drawn into her happiness. Then she quietly said something that Noah heard before anyone else. "This is the best night of my whole life." And when the father smiled back at her, Victoria realized there was not a single trace of self-pity in him. Not resentment. Not bitterness. Only gratitude. The kind of quiet dignity that money could never purchase. For several minutes, the restaurant seemed suspended in a rare kind of peace. Snow drifted beyond the towering windows. The city glowed beneath a blanket of white. The little girl carefully slid her report card back into the envelope as though it were something priceless. Her father smiled and tucked it safely inside his jacket. "You earned tonight," he told her. "Every bit of it." She beamed. "Even dessert?" "Especially dessert." Noah laughed quietly from across the room. It was the first genuine laugh Victoria had heard from him all evening. She glanced at her son and saw something she had not expected. Admiration. Not for an athlete. Not for a celebrity. Not for someone wealthy or famous. For a father. The realization settled heavily in her heart. Then the atmosphere shifted. Near the center of the restaurant, a server carrying a tray suddenly slowed. She placed one hand against a nearby chair and took a careful breath. Another server immediately noticed and stepped closer. Concern crossed her face. Several guests turned toward the scene. The dining room grew quieter. The young server attempted a reassuring smile and insisted she was fine, but it was obvious she was struggling to remain steady. The restaurant manager hurried over. Victoria rose halfway from her seat, uncertain whether help was needed. Before anyone else could move, the father at the corner table stood. He said something reassuring to his daughter and calmly crossed the room. There was no panic in him, no rush for attention, no desire to become the center of the moment. He simply walked over because someone needed help. The manager looked relieved the instant he arrived. The father knelt beside the server and spoke quietly. Victoria could not hear the words, but she saw the effect immediately. The young woman's breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. Whatever anxiety had gripped the room began to ease. "How does he know what to do?" Noah whispered. Victoria did not answer. She was wondering the same thing. The father remained calm, asking a few simple questions while the manager brought water. Within moments, the server appeared far more comfortable. Color returned to her face. Several guests who had been watching returned to their meals. The tension dissolved as quickly as it had appeared. The father stood and offered the server an encouraging smile. She thanked him repeatedly. He simply nodded and returned to his table as though nothing remarkable had happened. Yet something had changed. The manager followed him back. Sir, he said warmly. Thank you. Truly. The father smiled. She is going to be fine. How did you know exactly what to do? For the first time all evening, curiosity spread through the room. Even the businessmen nearby seemed to pause their conversation. The father hesitated. His daughter looked up at him proudly. Because my dad used to do that every day, she answered before he could speak. The manager looked confused. Do what? The little girl smiled. Help people. A brief silence followed. Then she added words that made Victoria sit perfectly still. He used to lead emergency response teams before he became my full-time dad. The restaurant fell noticeably quieter after the little girl's words. Conversations softened. Silverware paused. Even the businessmen who had spent most of the evening focused on themselves seemed suddenly interested. The father looked mildly embarrassed by the attention. Lily, he said gently, you do not have to tell everybody my life story. It is not everybody, she replied with a grin. Just the whole restaurant. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. The tension disappeared instantly. The manager smiled. Well, whatever you used to do, thank you. You helped us tonight. Anyone would have done the same. Not everyone. The manager replied honestly. The father nodded politely and returned to his seat. Yet Victoria noticed something important. He did not elaborate. He did not explain his background. He did not mention accomplishments. He simply sat down and picked up the conversation with his daughter exactly where they had left it, as though helping people was the most ordinary thing in the world. Noah stared across the room. Mom, he whispered. He is a hero. Victoria glanced at him. Maybe. No. He definitely is. She looked toward the corner table again. A hero. The word seemed too dramatic and yet strangely accurate. Not because of anything extraordinary, but because of the complete absence of ego. The father had every opportunity to become the center of attention. Instead, he seemed determined to remain in the background. That was rare. Very rare. Then Noah surprised her again. I am going over there. Victoria blinked. What? I am going to say hi. Noah. I am serious. Before she could stop him, he was already standing. Victoria's first instinct was to call him back. Yet something stopped her. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the growing realization that her son needed this interaction more than she understood. Noah carefully crossed the dining room. Lily spotted him first. Her face brightened immediately. It is the waving boy, she announced. The father looked up and smiled. Hello there. Noah suddenly appeared nervous. Hi. Hi, Lily replied. I am Lily. I am Noah. The father extended his hand. Ethan Walker. Noah shook it. Nice to meet you, sir. Ethan smiled warmly. Nice to meet you too. From her table, Victoria watched the exchange unfold. Noah relaxed almost immediately. Within seconds, he and Lily were discussing school, favorite books, and which Chicago sports teams disappointed their fans the most. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Children often built bridges adults could not. Then Noah pointed toward Victoria. That is my mom. Lily waved enthusiastically. Victoria froze. Every eye at Ethan's table turned toward her. For one awkward second, she considered pretending not to notice. Then Ethan offered a polite nod. A simple gesture. Respectful. Genuine. Victoria found herself standing before she fully realized she had made the decision. She smoothed her jacket and walked across the restaurant. The city lights shimmered behind the glass. The piano continued playing softly somewhere in the background. And for reasons she could not fully explain, her heart was beating much faster than it should have been. When she reached the table, Ethan stood immediately. Not because of her title. Not because he recognized her name. Simply because that was the kind of man he was. And in that moment, Victoria Hayes did something that surprised everyone in the restaurant, most of all herself. She smiled and said, Would you mind if Noah and I joined you for a few minutes? For a moment, Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Then he glanced at Lily, who was already grinning from ear to ear. I think that means yes, he said. Victoria laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar even to herself. Within minutes, chairs were rearranged and two separate tables became one. The change seemed small, yet it altered the entire evening. Noah and Lily immediately continued their conversation as though they had known each other for years. They compared favorite teachers, favorite books, and favorite winter traditions. Every few seconds one of them would laugh, and the other would laugh harder. Watching them felt strangely effortless. Victoria settled into her chair and looked across the table at Ethan. Up close, She noticed details she had missed from a distance. The faint lines around his eyes. The weathered hands of someone accustomed to working hard. The calm confidence that came from experience rather than status. "So," she said, "Lily tells me you used to lead emergency response teams." Ethan smiled modestly. "A long time ago. That sounds important." He shrugged. "At the time, maybe. Now I mostly focus on being her dad." Lily immediately pointed at him. "He is the best one." Ethan groaned dramatically. "You are making me sound much better than I am." "Nope. I forget things. Sometimes. I burn pancakes. Frequently. I still cannot figure out streaming passwords." Lily nodded seriously. "That part is definitely true." The table erupted in laughter. Victoria found herself relaxing in a way she rarely experienced. Usually, every dinner involved expectations. Conversations had objectives. Relationships carried obligations. Yet nothing here felt transactional. Nobody was trying to impress anyone. The simplicity felt refreshing. Noah leaned forward. "What do you do now, Mr. Walker?" Ethan looked at him. "Construction management." "Do you like it?" "Most days." "Why?" Ethan considered the question. "Because at the end of the day, I can point to something real and say we built that." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds kind of awesome." "It can be." Victoria studied him carefully. There was no bitterness when he spoke about the life he had left behind. No regret. Only gratitude for the one he had now. That intrigued her more than she expected. Across the restaurant, several diners had begun quietly observing their table. Even the businessmen seemed unusually quiet. Something about the scene drew attention. A successful executive. A hard-working father. Two children laughing together. For strangers becoming something less than strangers. The snow continued falling outside. The city lights shimmered below. The restaurant felt warmer than before. Then Victoria asked a question she had not planned to ask. Was tonight really because of the report card? Ethan looked at Lily and smiled. Absolutely. Lily sat taller in her chair. He promised. A promise is a promise, Ethan said. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. She thought about canceled dinners, delayed vacations, missed school events, important meetings that always seemed urgent at the time. Across from her sat a man who had very little compared to many people in the room. Yet somehow he possessed something extraordinary. Presence. The ability to make another person feel like they mattered completely. And for the first time in a very long time, Victoria Hayes began wondering whether success had been measuring the wrong things all along. The evening seemed unwilling to end. Empty plates had been cleared away. Dessert crumbs remained on small white dishes. Outside, Chicago shimmered beneath fresh snow while inside Bellamy's glowed with warmth and quiet conversation. Noah and Lily were now comparing drawings. Ethan listened attentively. Victoria watched. The longer she sat there, the more unusual the entire evening felt. Hours earlier, these people had been strangers. Now something deeper connected them. Not business, not obligation. Something simpler, something real. Eventually, Ethan glanced at his watch and smiled at Lily. All right, kiddo. Lily immediately frowned. Already. School still exists tomorrow. She groaned dramatically. Noah looked equally disappointed. Do you have to go? Ethan laughed. Unfortunately, yes. The children exchanged the kind of look only children can share when they wish time would slow down. Chairs shifted. Coats were gathered. The evening was ending. Yet Victoria felt an unexpected sense of loss. She had attended hundreds of dinners. Most disappeared from memory before the next morning. This one already felt different. Ethan stood and helped Lily into her coat. She slipped her hand into his. The gesture was automatic. Comfortable. Trusting. Victoria felt that familiar ache inside her chest again. Noah had once reached for his father's hand exactly the same way. Then something happened that nobody expected. Victoria stood. The movement drew attention from nearby tables. Even the businessmen glanced over. She took a slow breath. For perhaps the first time in years, she ignored titles, expectations, and appearances. She simply listened to her heart. Then she knelt beside Lily, so their eyes were level. The little girl looked surprised. Lily, Victoria said gently, would it be all right if Noah and I had dinner with you and your dad again sometime? Silence settled over the table. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that arrives when something honest enters the room. Lily blinked twice. Then her eyes widened. Really? Victoria smiled. Really? Lily immediately looked at Ethan. Ethan looked equally surprised. For a moment, he seemed unsure what to say. Noah practically bounced with excitement. Please say yes. Several diners nearby stopped pretending not to watch. The restaurant had grown remarkably quiet. The city lights sparkled beyond the glass. Snow drifted softly through the darkness. Ethan looked at his daughter. Lily was smiling so hard it seemed impossible for her not to. Then he looked at Noah. Then at Victoria. Finally, he smiled. A genuine smile. Warm, grateful, uncomplicated. I think we would like that very much, he said. Lily clapped her hands. Noah cheered softly. Around them, people returned to their meals, but something lingered in the atmosphere. A feeling difficult to explain. Victoria rose. Slowly, she realized that the unbelievable thing was never about money, status, or grand gestures. It was about choosing connection when distance would have been easier. Choosing people over appearances. Choosing grace over assumptions. As Ethan and Lily prepared to leave, Noah and Lily exchanged promises to see each other again. Then the father and daughter walked toward the elevator beneath the golden lights of the restaurant. Victoria watched them go, not because she was looking at what they had, but because for the first time in many years, she could clearly see what had been missing. And somewhere between the snow outside, the laughter of two children, and the quiet dignity of a single father who always kept his promises, for lives had begun a brand new chapter. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.